I wanted everyone to be aware that there's a range of alcohol contents in these things, but nothing is above that 13-14% range.
And that's based on information provided to you by pre-con, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
State regulates that.
Okay.
Okay. Procedurally, I've been listening to what you want to do, and Joe, I thank you for your concern. It just seems that if you granted a use variance, which you know that you have enforcement issues, but just because you're an agricultural use doesn't mean that you can sell alcohol, okay? But in this instance, with the cider, and the good neighbors that they are, you know, we support them, okay? But to put a procedure in place for them to be able to grow, I don't think can be decided tonight. None of us have a crystal ball, okay? I think as his business grows, there needs to be a process in place. And I think that process is kind of labeling this somewhat of a tavern type thing or a conditional use, which would allow you to make a decision as to whether or not the use would be permitted in an RD zone on their farm only. And then with regard to the conditions that are set, the Board of Supervisors would do that in a conditional use hearing, because that's usually, it's reviewed by the Planning Commission for security, lighting, coverage, landscaping. It's section 4 in the zoning ordinance that all uses have got to adhere to. Article 4, all uses in the township must adhere to. And that's usually done through that process of the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors through a conditional use hearing. So that would allow them to grow as they grow, but yet to still continue to have the decision that you're making. And, you know, we can all continue to be good neighbors.
That's where I was going with Karen.
Yeah, well, that's in place in the zoning ordinance already. It's
Section 408.
yeah, 408. It's for all uses.
Conditional use, or that's for all uses?
It's for all uses, but a conditional use, because this can't technically be put into a little box. A potato is not a bottle of vodka, okay? So the potato is an agricultural use, but the vodka, is it? I don't know that answer, so I guess that would be up to you guys. I don't think a bottle of vodka is agricultural use, nor do I think hard cider is an agricultural use, but I think apples are, and I think cider is. And again, our neighbors are very responsible. I don't have a problem with that. So the only thing I could liken the use that they want to do, if you could bring in the craft beer, if you could bring in the vodka, would be a tavern type use on the property with agricultural tendencies, okay? And in that instance, it would call for a conditional use hearing before the zoning hearing, not zoning hearing board, but the Board of Supervisors. And I think it would be fair to everyone, where they get the use, they can do it, and then just whatever conditions, let the Board of Supervisors do.
If the state calls it a limited winery satellite location, we can't change the name of it to a tavern type use with agricultural tendencies. It's a limited winery. They regulate what's allowed to be sold there, how much is allowed to be sold, when it's allowed to be sold.
I'm not saying to limit. I'm not saying to limit that, Carl. I'm saying just the sale of it at all would tend to. If you look in the zoning ordinance under the definition of everything in there, agricultural doesn't say anything about producing alcohol. Growing, you can't grow alcohol.
Well, you can't grow alcohol anyway, but we're here because it's not in the zoning ordinance. That's exactly why we're in front of the board, because it's not in the ordinance. I'm not saying it's a straight agricultural use. I'm saying that you can't say it's a tavern type use. It's a limited winery. That's what
you do have
the definition of it is, and you can't change the name of it because the state licenses it as a limited winery.
Okay, so then does that mean that Roba's can't call it a hard cider tent? They have to call it a limited winery? No, they could call it what they want to, just like you could call it a tavern with regard to the uses, because it's alcohol. You've got country clubs in the ordinance. I mean, you could pick one that very closely mimics what they do. They sell food, they sell alcohol, they'll sell cider.
I'm not talking about, you can call it whatever you like, what I'm saying is that the state licenses are under a very specific type of establishment. They have a different license for bars than they have for limited wineries, and if it's being listed as a limited winery, we can't treat it as a bar. That was all I was saying, is they're different uses. If it was a tavern, we have that in the ordinance, so we know where they go. This is a limited winery.
But it's still alcohol. Yes?
Wasn't arguing that point.
Lake March still sell, six-packs and stuff.
None anymore.
They don't sell
No.
those.
Yeah, JW was across the road.
Jeff, if you were to expand the size of that cider garden, or you were going to change your hours, does that require LCD approval?
I think it would. We have applied, yes, answer is yes, because.
I'm not familiar with limited winery licenses, but I'm familiar with.
With the satellite location, you are applying for specific operational hours and size of facilities. So if our application is approved and we become a satellite location of FreeCon, we cannot go outside the 80-foot by 80-foot area without notifying the PLCB that we're doing so.
Well, you have to do more, I'm assuming that you have to do more than notify, because
Right.
if you had a restaurant liquor license.
It would be a reapplication.
Yeah, because if you wanted to expand the facility, you have to get permission from the LCP, they have to go up and investigate.
Yes.
You know, you just can't take 80 by 80 and make it 100 by 100.
Right.
There's a process that you have to go through. Is the same true with the operating hours? See,
I would assume so, but I do not know the answer to that question specifically.
Because, you know, the LCB and the regulations and state law says these are the allowable operating hours if you have this type of a license. So I'm assuming, I didn't get that far into the research, but I'm assuming that there has to be some similar restriction on the
There are.
winery license.
There are restrictions, you know, even on, I think, a simple example is on Sundays, you can't serve before 11 unless you are serving food on the premise at the same time. We do, so we're allowed to do that, but yes, to your point, there are restrictions on the hours that you're allowed to sell. You can't sell past 2 a.m. and before 6 or 7 a.m. So again, I would assume that we would have to reapply because when we are applying right now, we're laying out specifically the hours of our operation. So, but I don't want to say yes definitively because I don't know that for sure.
Do you have food there, like
Yes.
hot dogs and hamburgers?
My experience with the LCD on these is that I've never got a call about hours. I think that he's right as long as it's, before 2 a.m., after 6 a.m. I do get, during the licensing process or any expansion, they normally call me. I'm working with them now in the tavern because they want to put a deck on the side. So any expansion of they would have to submit a new diagram and reapply, and because only the licensed area is, allowed to be used for.
Now, so here's the follow-up question to that. If they have to go through that process with the LCB, would they have to come back in front of the board at the same time and go through another variance process to get that permission?
If you limited it, if you put a condition on it of 80 by 80, and they wanted to make it 200 by 200, the LCP would ask me if that was okay, and I would have to say no, that they were limited to that they would have to apply for that variance.
In other words,
I don't
what we're voting on now would be specific.
Yeah.
If they want to expand, then it would have to come back here.
I mean, in the past, because it was, you granted variances in the past because it wasn't in the ordinance, but put conditions on it, also made it, defined it more clearly, like with the craft brewery last time. You covered the conditions for the craft brewery, but also in your decision, decided that any future applications would be a conditional use in that zone.
Well, that's something we didn't want to do in this instance.
Well, right, but if there is a concern and if there is, ultimate expansion in the future, they are a working agricultural facility. If it were a conditional use in that zone, then if they wanted to expand, wanted to change their hours, they could go back to the Board of Supervisors as a conditional use to expand.
Because when you take a look at principal permitted uses and accessory uses, the RD and the RU zones are very, very similar. So if we followed the path that we set out for what was that, a craft brewery, wasn't it?
Yes.
If we did that same turn, that would, I think, address the concerns of the neighbors, whereas any future development would be treated as a conditional use, and then they'd have to come in front of the Board of Supervisors.
And planning commission.
Okay. Rose, I know you're waving the flag back there. What do you want to say?
There's not much difference between this and when you approve Malatesi's. And as far as alcohol, now I know that the Country Club and JWs were businesses that have alcohol, and they've been grandfathered. So, this is going back to, you have to be fair with everybody, not just because you like this person and you don't like that one. So it's not much different than Malatesi's. And I sat through Malatesi's hearing, so and I haven't heard of any issues. I mean, you can make an issue about your own pavilion up there. There's not supposed to be alcohol up there, and people rent it and they bring alcohol.
Well, Malatesi's was a little bit different because they're producing on site.
Right, which was more complicated.
Right, but there's also a different state statute that says when you're producing on site, you get certain preferences, if you want to refer to them that way. They're not in production yet. If they were in production on site, this would be very similar to what the board did in Malatesi. But it's more similar to what we did with the craft brewery license. This Koskis was that?
Yes, Koskis.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bypass you. I know you wanted to participate.
I really don't have any questions. I think it's a great idea
All right.
to have it. I border property. I have the
We
big
think
city
it's
yard.
a great idea too, okay? It's just, again, the zoning hearing board has no enforcement power, okay? You can make conditions, but you don't have anyone that's a contact person that you can send out to police your decisions. That's why the planning commission and conditional uses and those processes are in place.
Well, of
And
course-
the big difference between Rova's and Malatesi's is the zoning district. RD is the most restrictive, and RU is not, and has different, and allows different businesses. So that's the difference. The reason it was zoned RD was because it's just within 6/10 of a mile of the school, and it would be outside.
If the board followed the same decision as in Muskoskis with the craft brewery, which granted the variance but treated any future changes in terms as a conditional use, would that satisfy your concerns?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We would love to have them do exactly what they have on their paper, absolutely.
What, I'm not super familiar with the conditional use, what,
The conditional use means, again, I don't want to do a lot of legal speak, but you heard me with the last hearing try to explain the concept of a permitted use and an accessory use. Well, you've got neither here. So you're asking for permission to use your land in a way that the zoning does not allow it to be used right now. That's what a variance is. You're asking for a use variance. The zoning board is where you come for a use variance. In the zoning ordinance, the Board of Supervisors has reserved to itself the right to make certain decisions on uses of land in each district. Those are called conditional uses.
So if what you're looking for is a conditional use, you don't come to the zoning board and ask for it, you go to the board of supervisors and ask for it. There's a review process you go through as part of that. So the last time this issue came up, and again, it was in an RU district, not an RD district. You're an RD. The board's decision was to grant the variance to put, in that instance, it's a craft brewery in the location, but that any changes in the scope of the use or the use itself in the future would be treated as a conditional use in the RU zone. In other words, we had to plug it in somewhere and figure out who would be responsible for reviewing the applications
I was
in the
gonna
future.
say, so it really just sounds like it's who approves it, then it doesn't sound like they're really different.
That's a good way to look at it. Board of Supervisors would make the decision rather than the zone.
It would require the same such sort of hearing only in front of the board of supervisors, planning commission person, the board of supervisors. That would just be for any expansion of the limited winery area, it wouldn't have any effect on the other business, on the rest of your business. But if you wanted to make that bigger or, expand your hours, then you would apply for conditional use and come before the board of supervisors.
Now, here's a question that you have to answer for us. You didn't apply for an interpretation or a determination under the zoning ordinance. You applied for a use variance. If you are agreeable to amending your application to allow the board also to give an interpretation as to the appropriateness of the use in the zone, we can do something similar to what the board did in the craft brewery application, where the board said, we'll grant the variance, but in the future, if there are going to be any changes or similar applications, they'll be treated as conditional uses. They don't come back to the board, they go to the board of supervisors instead. So if you're agreeable to amending your application to include that request, then the board can do the same thing in this instance that it did for that craft brewery license.
What would happen if I said no?
Well, then we have to treat it as a strict variance, and there may be some limitations placed on it. The next time, if you wanted to expand beyond 80 by 80, in addition to going through the LCD process, you're going to have to come back to the board and ask for another variance.
Just out of curiosity.
Otherwise, you just go to the board of supervisors.
Right. So it's basically just a decision as, again, to who I come back to for approval.
Yeah, that's
For expansion.
a simple way to look at it, yeah. Here's the most convenient way for you to take a look at it. If we rely on that Laskoska's decision as our precedent, then your application would be approved tonight with restrictions on it, and your future expansions would go to the board of supervisors rather than come back here.
Right. Now, let's say that we did not expand in the next, 3 years, just kept working with the same facility. And then in our 4th year, dropped Freecon and went into production on our own. What would that process look like? Would we be coming back to you guys for another variance?
Not if it was treated as a conditional use, you'd go to the board of supervisors at that point. Okay? Basically, you're going to continue to do what you're already doing, except that you're producing your own product on site. Okay? There are other state laws that come into play in a situation like that. Maltesers had that same issue because they had orchards. They're not doing cider, but they were planting vines, and they were going to produce grapes that they were going to use together with the mash or with the juices, whatever they're bringing in from off-site.
Mm-hmm.
That implicates other state laws that protect a producer, an agricultural producer, who's converting the agricultural product into something else. Okay, you don't have that here because you're not producing.
Right.
But if you get to that point, then you would come back if what you're doing is treated as a conditional use from this point on. You would then go back to the board of supervisors and say, look, I want to convert from selling somebody else's product to producing and selling my own. And the board of supervisors would then make that determination. Somebody's going to have to make it one way or the other.
Right.
Okay, so it's a question of whether you want to come back to the zoning board or go to the board of supervisors.
Right. Well, I guess if that's the case, think we would probably amend our application like you're suggesting to follow the precedent that's set.
Would probably be the easiest way for you to know.
I think so, as far as expediting this to make sure that we get our feet on the ground this year.
This reduction would be basically principal use of their accept.
Exactly, yeah, it'll make it easier.
Right, it would actually be a principal for their use, but the people would require a commercial building that would have to be built for that, so you would have to probably be in a conditional use state anyway with that, because it would be being used to, although it's allowed use on its own, to make cider, to make a winery license, and have a building built that would require conditional use anyway.
And the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the LCB. So you think you have problems here. And your biggest problem is going to be in Harrisburg,
Yeah,
not
no
here.
problems here. I guess while we're amending, would I be able to adjust the allowed size of the cider garden now to allow for expansion without coming back here?
Well, again, you could do that in front of the zoning board, but you have to do the same thing with the LCB. Are you gonna use it, or are you trying to allow for future
I'm just
expansion?
allowing, for this year, I would still put in place the 80 by 80 area, but say we put in for the variance 150 by 150 for the garden, or instead of, a square, we do a square footage or whatever, but basically give me some play in the variance without having to come back here. Obviously, I'd still have to go back to the LCB, but it would save me the step of
Well, you still might have to go back to the board of supervisors, because from this point on, it would be treated as a conditional use. Even if you had the right to use the space, it simply says, here's the allotted space. The use that goes into that space will still have to be approved. You follow what I'm saying?
Not exactly.
Whether it's 80 by 80 or 150 by 150, that's just the perimeter of where you're operating, where the use is. The use that goes on still requires approval, so there's going to be a review process
I think,
at some point.
okay, I'm confused at what you just said.
Yeah.
I thought if you give them the use variance, what he planned on that paper, he can do. I understand he's asking if he could change it from an 80 by 80 to a 150 by 150, but in addition to that, I think your building was a little bit larger too, instead of an 8 by 10.
Yes.
So maybe you wanted to amend it for that too.
Well, yeah, I guess thank you for pointing that out.
No problem.
The area that the LCD is approving for us is actually the full 40 by 80 tent, the retail tent. But, maybe with you guys, we have to amend to the true size of the shed that's in the tent now. I guess I don't understand why, if you're approving us for 150 by 150, and next year I go from 80 by 80 to 120 by 120, I'm still under the area that you've approved, so why would...
Because if you're changing the size of buildings or things like that, and you have a variance for a specific 8 by 10 shed under a tent,
That part wouldn't be changing, it's just the perimeter of defense, basically, of what is contained in the site.
You're going to have to be very specific about what you're asking for. If you're just asking for the square footage or the dimensions,
That's all I'm asking for.
all right, to be increased from 80 by 80 to what?
I guess rather than putting actual dimensions on it, I'd rather just put a square footage, and then I can position it. If I want a rectangle rather than a square, I can do it that way. So 80 by 80 is what, 6,400 feet. So maybe we go 150 by 150 would be 22.5. So
you're looking for, you want to amend your application to allow for a perimeter of, or not a perimeter, you want square footage
yes,
of 22,500 square feet?
that seems like it's too high.
Put the calculator up.
It's a pretty large area.
Yeah,
22,000. 150 by 150.
Yeah, okay.
And we can call it 20,000.
20,000 square feet.
If that,
This was let out to the public by it, or an 80 by 80.
And, well, it was sent to the neighbors, it was not advertised that way, though. The advertisement in the paper just said that they were applying for a limited winery.
Oh, okay.
So it didn't get I didn't put, this information was sent to the neighbors, but the ad just said that it was an application of Roma Family Farms to become a satellite location with 3 kind of farms for.
Okay, I was going by this as being what?
Yeah, no, I didn't, that wasn't advertised that way, it was advertised just as a limited winery application.
Okay,
Satellite
so
location.
is it the building, what size is the building?
So the building that the bottles are being sold out of is actually 10 by 14.
Okay.
It's 10 feet by 14,
They
and
need another amendment.
it is under a 40-foot by 80-foot circus tent. Not that that's really
Under
relevant,
80
but
by what?
a 40 by 80 circus tent.
No, that
Um,
sounds
But
good.
that's,
Thank you.
that's seasonal. That-
Yes, yeah, that goes up and down, the building would move around. So the building for the bottles is 10 by 14, under that tent. The square footage that I'm referring to is the size of the, basically, yard that we're gonna put a fence around, to allow our customers to walk around with their cups of.
Is that where your production facility is going to be eventually located, or is that just retail? Assuming that you get into production, you haven't made that decision yet.
Yeah, it could be. There could be overlap in terms of the yard space that we're using for, you know, the cup sales and then the footprint of the building. But I don't know that for sure because I don't know exactly where the building's gonna go or where exactly.
Here's the reason I ask. Again, I only did a cursory review of the LCD regulations, but they seem to talk about sales on the premises where the product is produced. All right, so if you locate your production facility someplace else on your existing property, outside this perimeter we're talking about, I don't know if you're gonna need additional permission from somebody before you.
We couldn't build a barn and start making hard cider without approval from the DLCB.
But that I understand, but what I'm trying to figure out is, do you need to locate that within this 20,000 square feet? Or are you talking about at some point now?
I don't know why you would have to.
The LCB is an agency that it can
Right,
be
yeah.
very strange to deal with at times. So
I
even though
agree.
the reasonable person might not know why you should,
Yes.
the LCB might think of it differently.
I agree, but basically I think the LCB would see it as a dissolution of the agreement between us and FreeCon, which would then become, you know, null and void, no longer existing, and then we would reapply for a limited winery license of our own.
All right, so in other words, in the restrictions, because there will be restrictions associated with any use variance tonight, we don't have to cover a production facility within this 20,000 square
No.
feet. If it becomes an issue, that's something you'll have to be dealing with later on.
Yes,
Okay,
but-
that's understood.
Yes.
They would be getting their own license, at that point, they would have to come back to the board of supervisors,
Yeah.
because you're only approving this out of it.
So, I guess the two changes in subsequent restrictions are the size of the building from 8 foot by 10 foot to 10 foot by 14 foot, and the size of the cider garden from 80 foot by 80 foot to just
20,000
square
square
feet.
Anyone else who has any testimony they want to offer, questions asked? Yes, ma'am.
Well, honestly, I just want to express my support for what they're doing. If you see a way to give them the variance, as they've been good neighbors to us, I know that that'll continue in the future.
Yes, very good neighbors they are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman.
Are you okay with it?
Me?
Yeah,
Yes, I am.
okay.
Yes, I am, Murphy.
You're even closer.
I think it's a good idea.
So we can vote? Sure, I think so, unless you want to recess and discuss it, but it sounds like there's. I don't want to.
You want to get up and go home.
Yes, done a visit.
Well, thanks a lot.
Especially. Mr. Sullivan, can you start the voting, please?
I don't want to, but I.
Oh, come on.
Yes.
Mr. Vale?
Yes.
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 And,
Well, good luck.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Board.
Thank you.
Can we adjourn?
Motion?
All right, we're adjourned, thanks.
Thank you.
Too late.